All right, I think we are live. Christian, I think I got you off mute, and I'm going to share my screen here in a second.
Perfect.
I got my big ugly mug up there on the right. Hopefully everybody can see it now. All right, let me just get off of that slide here. I'll put you and me up there, Christian. How's that?
Sounds good. Yeah.
So welcome everyone. Perfect. Welcome everyone. Welcome to our webinar on syncing your ITSM stack. Hopefully that's what you're here for, because that's what we're going to talk about. We're glad to have you. I have with me Christian Matzer from SEKO Logistics, and we'll do some quick introductions here for this webinar. But again, welcome to everybody. Trying to let everybody pile in here and make sure we've got a good number of attendees. Just a couple of housekeeping items. If you have questions or comments throughout the webinar, please feel free to post those. I'm got myself and a team monitoring the comments, and so we'll try to make sure we address any questions, and we have some time for some Q&A at the end as well. But yeah, we've given enough time for people to get logged in. My name is Justin Meadows. As you can see there on the screen, a little bit of background on myself. I started working with ServiceNow back in 2017 with the Kingston release. And as part of that initiation into the ecosystem, I implemented strategic portfolio management and IT service management. Hopefully you'll hear a lot about IT service management in this particular webinar when it comes to integration. So that's one of my passions, and so passionate about it that I actually started creating content, putting it on places like LinkedIn, YouTube, other social media, stuff like that. So that's my background. Christian, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Justin. Well, thank you for having me. I'll do a quick intro of myself. My name is Christian Matzer, and I'm an IT Delivery Manager Consultant at SEKO Logistics. I oversee the IT Project Management Office and consult across different IT teams, from IT infrastructure to technology solutions, software development, and IT operations. My focus is mostly around reducing technical debt in organizations by implementing smart and lean solutions that pretty much aim to eliminate waste, improve productivity, and deliver tailored strategies for optimized operations and results.
Awesome, great. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Christian. I'm really excited to share your use
A
case
pleasure.
with everybody that's watching. I think it'll be fun, and we'll see how integrations can be easy in ServiceNow and other applications, I think is the goal of this webinar. So we wanted to first start off talking about what it costs when you don't have an integration. So if you have ServiceNow, or let's keep it agnostic. Let's say any application. You've got different teams working in different tools, and without an integration, there is a cost to that, right? So you have the resources that are using those applications, their time while they're using those applications, and the experience for them, right? So their experience in working in this application and working in that application in order to get all the information they need to do their jobs. So that is what the lack of an integration could potentially cost you, because there may be purpose-built reasons to use those specific applications, which we'll cover as we move through our use cases. But Christian, I'll leave it open for you. Is there any other costs that might be missing, or in your experience that you've experienced? In your experience that you've experienced?
Yeah, I guess let me first start by explaining what SEKO does. I think that would help. SEKO Logistics is a premier first-class retail and e-commerce logistics provider with over 150 offices in over 60 different countries. So you can get an idea of the size of the organization, right? This inevitably creates an ecosystem of multiple teams and, of course, multiple tools, and in some cases, multiple sources of truth as well. So, um, to that point, I think that definitely creates, a big amount of resources, time, and user experience consideration that's needed.
Yeah. The the other thing too is that the I was just going to touch on too is that kind of how people perceive applications, right? Their perception of I want to use that application versus I don't want to use that application. And I guess that's that last box there, the user experience, is that if people perceive that they have everything they need in one application, you're no longer incurring that cost of dissatisfaction, I guess, with, I hate using that tool because I don't have everything I need. So,
Yeah, and
oh,
there's always, resistance to change and,
mm,
learning and user adoption curves that you got to consider in that as well, right?
yep, yeah, exactly. You sound like you've managed a few projects before and tried to get people to adopt applications.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I've been in the consulting business for a while and been with the intention of helping organizations thrive, right? And focus on what really matters, which is driving results and getting things done. So,
Yeah, sweet. Well, we made some time for story time. In particular, I think I have some background in actually doing integrations. I just wanted to cover two of those use cases that I've run into to share with those that might be watching or listening. Number one, well, for me, was my background was healthcare IT. And in healthcare IT, you have something in a healthcare system, you have electronic medical record. And so when we implemented ServiceNow, the support for the electronic medical record was outsourced to external service desk. And so we needed a way to integrate with that external service desk. And for that journey for me, that involved like two ServiceNow admins on the healthcare side or the hospital side, and then two developers on the external party side. And we did like a fully pro code developed integration, right, using APIs, and they were using a different ITSM tool, right, that we were integrating with. And so when we did that, there's things like, you've got all the states of an incident, for example, in ServiceNow have to be mapped to all the states for an incident in that external application. And so in that particular example, they had more states than we had in ServiceNow. So it was kind of like, well, if you're in that one, we're going to map to this one in ServiceNow rather than create a new one. So it was a very involved integration, and very important too, because in healthcare, resolution could impact patient care. So it was a very, very serious integration. The second one that I've actually experienced, and it has to do with the YouTube channel that I have, is using the Jira Spoke in ServiceNow. I get so many questions from the ServiceNow community and people seeing those videos about, hey, I've got the spoke in my PDI, or I've got the spoke in my dev or test incidents, and it's not doing X or it's not doing Y. And so at one point, I had actually just created a video of end to end. Here's how you do the integration between ServiceNow and Jira. And even that still gets the questions right, because they can see exact steps that I took. I talked through it. But even then, those spokes, and I'll cover this later too when we talk about it, the integration hub via ServiceNow offers don't always meet all the use cases or all the unique requirements, like the example I just gave about healthcare. There's certain things that you might need, SLAs or states, like I was just talking about. So sometimes, while there's out of the box kind of low code solutions provided by ServiceNow, they don't always hit the mark. And that's not a criticism of them. It's just that some use cases are more complex than what they've necessarily thought through. Have you had similar type of stories in your experience, Christian?
Yeah, quite a few, I guess. One that I can probably share is recently, while collaborating with SEKO's IT operations manager, we uncovered a significant pain point in the SEKO IT service desk workflow. So the challenge laid in escalating ServiceNow incidents to our engineering and software development teams who primarily worked in Jira. This gap basically created inefficiencies and they were basically costly, cumbersome, lengthy, and just not great in general for overall user experiences and even internal teams experiences, right? So um, especially when it comes to ITSM tools, you got to make sure everyone is aware and has the visibility, right?
Mhm. Yep. Yeah, especially when it comes to ITSM, because with incidents coming in, I'll just stick with the incident example. That can involve so many different teams, either individually, like to resolve the incidents, or to resolve it together. To your point about making sure ITSM has what it needs.
Yeah, exactly. So it's definitely, a little bit of a story of solving pain points and transforming the workflows that we had. So to kind of follow on that same train of thought and story, to enable our developers to review and manage these escalations, we initially granted them ServiceNow access. Um, this, of course, came with its own set of issues: increased licensing costs, a lot of manual entry from one system to another, um, steep learning, and as I mentioned before, user adoption curves for developers that weren't really familiar with ServiceNow, and of course, contemplating the need for training at some point, right? So the result in general was just a slow workflow that felt disjointed, expensive, and far from optimal.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So my next slide, or the next slide we have up here, Christian. I've got too many screens going on, and Steve over there is kind of driving me nuts with his story time. It's funny when the first time you see it, but after like 100 times. So we did want to talk about too, like how that what can be improved if you do those integrations that we're talking about. So what how is IT going to benefit by doing an integration with an external application or a third party application? And the swivel chair is meant to describe like let's use Jira. I'm in Jira and I have something, but I need to update something in ServiceNow so the service desk knows the status of it. So I got a swivel chair over to that other place and put the information in. I may enter it wrong. I may fat finger and typo it. May not do it fast enough, and the customer's calling asking for status. So it's just a very manual kind of process that everybody hates, or most everybody hates. The middle part there, the familiar tool set slash UI, is kind of meeting people where they are. So if you have a development team that's in Jira, and that's primarily what they use, then why go through the expense and the cost of training them and licensing them in ServiceNow when we can just simply do an integration and they'll have what they need? The last part, the elimination of shadow IT, is really a kind of shout out to the ability of humans to kind of find workarounds when it doesn't work like they want, right? So that might be purchasing another application or something like that. And so if we can go ahead and do the integration, we can kind of eliminate that not misuse, but that unknown use of something. And I thought of an example as I was kind of getting ready for this. And Christian, I don't know if this actually happened to you, but if there's a manual and process in place, like let's pretend somebody goes to ServiceNow, they go to the incident list, they right click, export, download a spreadsheet, then they go over to Jira and they copy paste or they Jira. Maybe that works. Maybe that's a good workaround for the time being. But then that person goes on vacation. And they forgot that that was something that they do every day, right? So it's like an undocumented process that is actually how it's making the organization function correctly, but then all of a sudden it stops working and everybody's like, what's going on? Why isn't it working? And then you wait and 30 minutes, an hour later, like, oh, Francine's gone and she usually does the upload. That's the kind of shadow IT that I think I wanted to say, that we can get rid of that and make
Yeah,
ITSM better.
completely agree. Yeah, and I guess to that point, we have a dedicated level one service desk team, and it's managed by one of our trusted partners who handle ServiceNow on a daily basis. And with our ServiceNow package, we also had a limited amount of development hours for custom integrations, right? So really trying to find that middle ground of being able to get what you need from the tool and have those communicate with each other in a way that it's not manual can be a little bit painful without that, right? So um, especially one thing that you mentioned there, which is I think key here, which is the room for human error, right? We all make mistakes, and if there is a lot of manual entry, you do come across the possibility of having human error in the equation, and that just complicates everything a lot more, right? So
Yeah, I actually think too. There's several ways to do an integration, and we talked about this a little bit the other day, Christian, of where you can have an integration that's like real time in two-way, where it meets certain conditions, and then that integration passes data, it keeps it in sync. And then there's a way to implement and where a user initiates that integration through like clicking a button or doing something. And then again, there's that human error component of, hey, I put the ticket in and got it into the customer, but I forgot to hit the button to send it over to Christian's team and stuff like that. So even human omission, maybe not error, but just human omission.
yeah, agree. Yeah, and that kind of goes back to this specific scenario and what we came across, right? So Um, to kind of pick it back up, one of the things that we attempted to do to streamline the process is basically use those development hours to build an initial integration between ServiceNow and Jira, right? And this helped somewhat, but it wasn't really enough, right? It enabled basic communication between the two platforms, but all the manual steps that were still required, like adding the product type or syncing comments or coordinating between the L1 team and the developers, wasn't really cutting it for us. And on top of that, responses to customers often took longer than we were expecting, as everything was funneled through the L1 team first. So um, yeah, not ideal.
Yeah, you can almost say it kind of creates a bottleneck.
It definitely
um,
does. Yeah.
yeah, and you mentioned you had budget for um, developers, so that's cost. That's actually real money. You got to pay the developers, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the complex to use, I guess if you had gone forward with that integration, that with that budget, then you'd have to manage the ongoing maintenance of, okay, ServiceNow's got uh, what's the next release? I can't even remember. Xanadu versus Yokohama, right? And then that has
Mm.
upgrade components to it, and the different configurations that might be in ServiceNow, and then you've got the different configurations that might be in Jira, like the project or the issue types and stuff like that. And it gets really complex really quickly.
It does. Yeah. Especially as you mentioned, uh, with having a budget, it just complicates things even more, right? And within our ServiceNow package, we only had around 20 hours of development a month. So if something didn't get completed during that month, we had to wait until the next one to continue with the development of the integration. So it was just a very painful and lengthy process.
Yep. Yeah, and the last component there on the screen that everybody can see is that sometimes even the more complex integrations, when you're doing that development model, they take time to actually implement as well that environment, and then you might migrate all that to the test environment, and then once that's signed off and people do user acceptance testing, you migrate that into production. And that's a standard process no matter what, right? Even with something like what we're talking about today with Unito, you still have to follow that process, but it's much faster with a tool like Unito versus a traditional integration where you've got to do all that facilitation and kind of testing and stuff like that. You guys rolled out and you moved pretty quickly in your implementation, right?
Yeah, with Unito, right? Prior to that, it took us a little bit longer to get what we were expecting to get from the tool and the integration itself, right? I don't think I've mentioned this yet, but we part of the development was that we had to come up with uh, a I guess, a conditional to help us funnel and filter only the specific incidents in ServiceNow that we actually wanted into Jira. So that's just something to add to the table, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because you don't need everything. Like your Jira team's not supporting all of IT, so you got to be selective on what you send over.
Exactly. Yeah. So again, we kind of had to figure out a way to determine which of all the pool of incidents in ServiceNow we wanted to move into Jira, and that kind of led us into implementing a button to create Jira stories directly from ServiceNow. So it was an additional manual step that our L1 team needed to take after evaluating the incident and deciding that it needed to be escalated. They literally had to manually go into the incident in ServiceNow and click on create a Jira story. And not only that, but they had to make sure, and that's part of the manual entry, right, that they were selecting the right project without really having a lot of knowledge of the projects in Jira, and making sure they were sending it there properly.
Yeah. Yeah, because just like the developers don't know ServiceNow really well, your service desk doesn't know Jira very well, or probably.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I know we've talked about it before, Christian, but I'll repeat it for everybody on the webinar. I'm actually a huge fan of ServiceNow. I'm such a fan that I've got a YouTube channel and LinkedIn posts, all that stuff about ServiceNow. And so I wanted to sing the praises of what you can see there on the right is the possibilities to do integrations in ServiceNow with other applications. They leave like no barrier, right? So you have all kinds of options to synchronous, real time, asynchronous, batching, whatever you want to do. There's capabilities within the ServiceNow platform, but you got to hire the right people that understand those capabilities in order to do that. So it goes back to our cost and resources and time conversation. What ServiceNow does to kind of appeal to that low code, no code market is they introduced a long time ago Integration Hub. So you've got Integration Hub where you can design flows and subflows, and those flows and subflows can have actions associated with them. And in order to get people started, they have pre-built spokes. In fact, it's kind of second icon down there on the screen where you see spokes. So these spokes actually work with Integration Hub. And we use all of those in order to do low code, no code solutions really well. But like I was saying earlier, it doesn't meet all use cases. At some point, I'd say for me in my experience, like 60 to 70% of the time, I've got to get technical and get some code in there at some point because they just it doesn't, they're not aware of the custom field that was in Jira to in order for this project to use to track something, right? Because why would they know that? That's specific to, the customer and what they're doing. So I wanted to make sure to call out, hey, there are great ways to do integrations and very professional code way to do integrations. But these are some of the considerations you may want to think about. So Christian talked earlier about having the development team actually go into ServiceNow. Now you've got licensing. So you've got to, for the 1 or 2 incidents a week, right? I don't know what it is for you, Christian, but you'd have to license those users to be able to log into ServiceNow once in a while, if at all, in order to respond to those, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and it was with the intention of keeping them connected, right? And that just translated into, just like you said, an additional licensing cost, um, potential training, and kind of a micro training, introduction, and onboarding for the developers, because you can just throw them in the water and expect them to know what to do, right? And then user adoption, right? They weren't really used to working anywhere else but in Jira. So having them, navigate into a separate tool completely and understand where they need to go and how they communicate with the customer, and whatnot. It was a hassle. So
Sure. Yeah, and while we can't talk about, licensing for either of these applications, there is the way that ServiceNow, you can see it on their documentation is they bundle the spokes together. So we're talking about Jira. I can't remember what bundle it is, but it's kind of like that, cable package analogy, right? You want one channel, you want ESPN, but you got to buy the whole sports package in order to get ESPN, and that's kind of how Integration Hub is sold. And please don't ask me the particulars, but that's another constraint, is that it can get really expensive depending on the application you're trying to integrate and where it sits in those packages.
Absolutely. And it sometimes doesn't really make sense if you're only going to have, part of your workforce working all time and all day in ServiceNow, right? If it's the case like in the developer and engineering teams, that they don't spend most of their days and hours in ServiceNow, it really didn't make sense to have those additional licenses added, right? And
Yep.
same goes back to the help desk, right? The service desk team needing to potentially have some Jira licenses assigned to them so they can go back into Jira if needed, right?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. It looks like, Christian, we got a question on LinkedIn. It's from Ivana, and she posted especially complex. I'm going to read it because I don't apologize to everybody. My screen thing to show them on the screen isn't working. But she said, especially complex to use. We have ServiceNow tickets system to upload problems with their platform and ask for permissions and everything. However, it isn't user friendly and not so intuitive to use sometimes. She's asking, what kind of training do you recommend for the people who are attending clients? Did you guys do training, or did you experience issues with, ease of use and intuitive or not intuitive interfaces?
Yeah, and I will say, ServiceNow, I've used it in the past, and it's a really good ITSM tool, but it might not be the most user-friendly one, and it might not be as intuitive for non-technical folks as you would expect, right? Um, as I mentioned before, most of the ServiceNow work is managed by one of our trusted partners at SEKO, which translated in not having a big need in training, but still for those folks in our teams that really needed to go into ServiceNow to get their work done, we did need to implement and have a few training sessions with them.
And you guys, it's an internal training team, so someone internal to SECO, or did you guys hire out for training?
Yeah, no, we had to rely on hiring someone from our trusted partner teams.
Okay, got it. So Ivana, I don't know if that answers your question, but I'll make this one statement too: is that with any technology, any implementation of a process where you're asking people to do things, I think there needs to be training, right? Whether that's like a one pager, or record a video on Loom or something, and so that people know how to interact with it, and that should take care of some of the counterintuitiveness or the difficult to use if you're enabling people. So there's lots of strategies around getting for people to know what they should be doing or not doing. The rest of the stuff on the screen, I'll just summarize and say the there are some limitations around the number of transactions with Integration Hub 2, and I want to especially bring that up because of when you configure things like keeping something in sync. Well, how do you know if it's changed, or are you pulling and comparing, or is something generating an event and you're pushing it? Depending on how you design an integration, you may need to think about frequency and polling and stuff like that, and you can very quickly encounter rate limits on how much on both ends. This isn't just ServiceNow, but there's some in ServiceNow and Integration Hub. So definitely wanted to, and those can affect performance too. So the rest of the platform might suffer if you've designed that badly or implemented it poorly on either end. All right. We do have a couple of use cases, and I wanted to talk to the first two and let Christian elaborate on that third one there. But I want people to think about, well, not just different parts of the ITSM stack, right? That's what we're here to talk about. So you've got IT operations and development teams. And the example we came up with is you've got a team using Jira, like Christian's team, and they may want to implement something. Maybe they've got a new feature or an enhancement or something altogether new, a new user interface. And many times in many organizations, they're required to follow a change management process. And so we've been talking about incidents, getting over to development team. But there's the other side of things where they may need to, hey, I've got my story up in front of me, all the information I need. I need to convert that into a change request so I can comply with the change management process being asked by the ITSM teams. And in a similar vein, in the middle there, I tried to get creative because I want everybody to have a healthy, up to date CMDB. And one of the ways you do that is by making sure that people are validating and verifying the information that's contained within the CMDB. So you could, in theory, if there's a task, a certification or attestation task created in ServiceNow, you could sync that over to other tools like Jira or Trello or Asana, whatever everybody else is using, the other parts of the business that might need to respond to those. And then the last part, I think, is specific to your use case, Christian. This is, I might move through some slides as you're talking, but if you can tell us more about a little bit, you've already touched on it, but about your calls coming in from customers, reaching all the way over to your development team.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think you hit the nail on your comments on the ITSM framework. Um, and part of it is understanding that level one is key to following the framework, right? Making sure that we're managing incidents in the proper way, and that we are able to identify and alert as well when those incidents are turning into a problem, right? um, when it's no longer an isolated issue, but it's a recurring one, right? And when that's the case, most of the times L1 is not going to be able to troubleshoot or resolve it. And that's where, we need to involve other teams. In this case, software development and engineers that need to step in and, make a few changes, implement new features, or even fix bugs in order to be able to get that resolved, right? So just like you said, right, the incident might translate into a problem, and once it is a problem, it needs to go into development, and after development it's done, a change might be required, right? So it really helps and facilitates the communication in a seamless way, right, to have all teams connected.
And before you had the integration, either one of them that you worked on, your teams were doing it manually, right? I think it was a service desk manager, maybe.
Yeah, so it was a lengthy process and a little bit complicated, but in summary, our end users submitted a request through our service desk in ServiceNow. Level one support had to review the request, analyze it, and then get the approval for escalation if an escalation was needed, right? They needed to make sure that part of the escalation process, as I mentioned before, was to click on that create Jira story button in ServiceNow and make sure that while doing that, they were sending the Jira story to the proper project in Jira. After that, since we weren't able to really get, just like you mentioned before, all the custom fields um, from Jira communicated back into ServiceNow and vice versa, um, our service desk manager had to jump into Jira, review the incidents, and assign manually the different products for all the different incidents that we had or problems, right? So quite a lengthy and time consuming and manual process.
Yeah, sounds horrible to me. Sounds like the kind of chore that no one wants to do, but it has to be done, right, in order to get work done.
Exactly. Yeah.
But now you've got that automatically going back and forth between ServiceNow and Jira using Unito's integration tool, right?
Yes, exactly. And that's how and when Unito entered the picture, and it's funny because I first heard about Unito and used it, in fact, with the IT infrastructure team at SEKO. And SEKO was facing a communication gap between the engineering teams working in Jira and the overall project summary and overview of a few merger and acquisition initiatives that we had to our level leadership and executives that usually were debriefed based on milestones and Smartsheet. So we used Unito in that occasion to keep Smartsheet and Jira connected. And this is how I decided to look into Unito as our potential no-code, low-code solution again to seamlessly connect ServiceNow with Jira.
Awesome. Yeah, I think think we have the outcomes as a next slide here. Yeah, so um, the obviously that probably improved experiences for everyone, and we've talked already about the errors and omissions and stuff like that. But can you speak to like the the what I want to say the climate after the integration and kind of people using their different tools?
Yeah, I mean, it was a 180 degree switch, right? I think first off, Unito eliminated the clunky manual processes that were slowing us down and helped us focus on driving solutions forward, right? Um, and it was really helpful to have such an incredible team at Unito working really closely with us to implement the solutions and features we required. So, you know, now communication flows effortlessly between the two platforms. Incidents escalate smoothly from ServiceNow into Jira. And even comments, they sync automatically, keeping everyone in the loop in real time. And it is able to differentiate between internal comments and reply to customers, which for us was a huge deal. So developers can focus on what they do best without needing to navigate new tools, right?
Yeah, that's super powerful. Yeah, I love that. The next slide kind of covers what a great integration platform does, and I think Unito meets all of these. But Unito aside, this could be any integration platform. The ideal solution would be fully configurable without the need to code, right? So not having to write any code, and then two-way sync. While it seems like a checkbox to do a two-way sync, it is really really difficult to do this on your own. Like if you're bespoke writing your own integration, two-way sync can get into looping. It can get into username conflicts with a service account versus a user, a named account. Christian just mentioned comments. Attachments are another one that are a big hassle when you're doing two-way syncs. So while it's just a small box on the screen, two-way sync is a big deal. And then being extensible. So Christian just mentioned smart sheets. So the nice thing about Unito or any really great platform is that it should understand there's more than just ServiceNow and Jira. There's other applications that these business groups are using, and I love that you brought up smart sheets. I forgot that about the details for. I think it's your leadership or executive team, right?
Correct. Yeah. So, overall, Unito has been a lifesaver and a game changer for us. Again, before the overall workflow and incident lifecycle and turnaround times weren't great, and in general, customers raised their incident requests through ServiceNow, and after all the process that level one had to follow, they finally got that Jira story into Jira, right? And just that there created a big gap of at least, 1 day, 2 days before we were even able to get back to the customer, right? So really having a workflow that is faster, more effective, and significantly cost efficient. And best of all, customers and internal SEKO teams are seeing the difference in the form of a quicker and more accurate responses. So, just in general, this experience has reinforced a really valuable lesson, which is, in my opinion, that the right tools don't just solve problems, but they transform the way we work, right?
Yeah, very well said. We've got a visual to kind of show what Christian's use case here, and so what you're seeing, and if you were on the pre stream before we started, you might have seen this on the video. But essentially, there's an incident being created in ServiceNow. That incident then gets created on the Jira board, and then when the developer comes in, updates the status or adds comments, like Christian was saying, it's keeping them in sync. So that's the real value, the transformation. I like how you phrase that.
Absolutely. And, I think the best of all here is, um, as I mentioned before, for our non-technical folks, just having an intuitive, user-friendly, reliable, versatile, flexible, no-code solution can help tremendously, right? Especially when it eliminates human error, it reduces operational costs and turnaround times, and it just improves the overall user sentiment and experience, and not just for our end users, but also for our internal team members, and just helps everyone focus on the things that really matter.
Yeah. I put up on the screen a visual of Unito's field mapping configuration. So there's no code involved. On the left-hand side is ServiceNow incident fields, and on the right-hand side is billing support project in Jira, and all those fields. And you can see in the middle, you get to specify it's one way, which direction, if it's one way, if you're going from ServiceNow to Jira or from Jira to ServiceNow. And then in the middle there, there's go both ways, right? Keep them in sync. And this can be done, which I thought was cool. When you start setting this up, it can automatically suggest the field mappings, right? So you can just say, yeah, automatically do it, or you can manually do it. But Christian, we were talking how, like when you saw this interface to start configuring it, like was this really easy to use and kind of you understood um, what was going on?
Yeah, it's really straightforward. You can't really get lost. It's, you know, I can't really think of a way of making it easier for anyone because, even the setup process, it kind of walks you through step by step. And at some level, even in some occasions, depending on, the complexity of the tools, it is able to automatically map some of the fields that are required to be mapped. So it's really great.
Not sure what happened there, but somehow I got signed out in the middle of while you were talking. We fixed it though. But yeah, there's one more screen here too. This is the, like I think you mentioned it earlier. You were talking about you may not want to send all the incidents. So there's even a way to configure rules about how that integration works. And was this just as intuitive for you?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward, and just like you said, it really helps nail down the amount of work that you actually want to get synced, right, and communicated. So it's just a matter of understanding the conditionals, and again, no code is just a couple of drop down menus that you got to select the right option from, right? So
Yeah, it looks like we've got a question from Melanie. I'll just repeat it so everybody knows what we're responding to. But she asked, what's the difference between Scrum methodology and ServiceNow? Can they complement each other? Um, Christian, is that one you can tackle? I can answer it if you can't.
well, thank you. I think it's a good question. I think there are different frameworks, but they can definitely complement each other. And ServiceNow is more of a tool, while it definitely includes the application of different frameworks, such as the ITSM framework. Scrum is not really reliable on a tool, but more as a mindset, mentality, and framework of work in general, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and there's actually when it comes to integrations, one of the ways I encourage people to do it is to create the Scrum equivalents in ServiceNow and sync those over. Not everybody does it that way. Some people go incident to Jira, but you could go incident to story in ServiceNow and then pass the story over to Jira. There's different ways to do it. So I think
Absolutely.
Melanie, with her question, I like what you just said. There's the process of Scrum, and then there's the tool that you're using. And yeah, I can
Exactly.
complement. I definitely think they can complement each other.
Absolutely.
In your case, that's what's happening. You've retained a Scrum tool called Jira and an ITSM tool called ServiceNow. You're using both in the organization.
Correct. Yes.
Perfect complements. I swear I've got too many screens going on here. All right. Oh, wow. We moved into questions. So we just answered a question, but if you guys have other questions for Christian and myself about integrating IT service management from ServiceNow with different applications, might let it sit here, Christian. There's a little bit of a lag between us talking and kind of what everybody sees on the streaming platforms. So let's see if we get some questions in here. While we're waiting for questions, what's the future look like for your team and this integration? What's the next exciting thing that you're working on?
It looks promising. It looks promising. We look forward to continue using Unito for different use cases. We want to continue to strengthen our ITSM framework in ServiceNow and have that communicate back into Jira in all the applicable cases. But we're also exploring possibilities of other tools that we can integrate, right? Such as Salesforce, for example. So, um, there's definitely an umbrella of different products that fall under, Unito's capabilities, and it's, about you getting creative.
Sure. Yeah. We've got a question from PG. PG asks, how do you measure success for ITSM integration? Like, what metrics do you typically prioritize? Do you guys have any metrics you're tracking?
Yeah, well, of course, and especially for incident management, we measure basic KPIs such as service level, turnaround times, response times, and resolve times, even second contact, all that stuff, as well as NPS scores or CSAT, right?
I didn't think about the NPS, and that's Net Promoter Score, and CSAT is customer satisfaction, right? So you're
Correct.
surveying after, yeah. And did those were you measuring those before the integration and after the integration by any chance?
Yeah. We manage those specifically through ServiceNow, and we did see a significant and drastic decrease in turnaround times and in service level improvement in general as we implemented this integration.
Very nice. PG said, "Thank you, thank you for the question, PG. We appreciate it."
Absolutely.
Any other questions? We are happy to. Oh, did I not? Yep, we answered that one. I've got on my left hand side, I got LinkedIn and YouTube, so I get confused on what I responded to. We've got a team helping us too with the questions. But it doesn't look like much other questions are coming in. We really, Christian, thank you for taking the time out of your day to speak about the integration you did with Unito, and thanks everyone who attended or who's watching after. I know several people I reached out to said, "Is it going to be recorded?" And yes, it's going to be recorded. It'll be available on LinkedIn using the same link that you might have seen. You can go rewatch this webinar, and it'll also be available on my YouTube channel. So I'm at Justin Meadows on YouTube, and all my videos are there, and this will be one of them that you can watch after the fact. Any closing words or for me or for everyone else, Christian, before we sign off?
Well, just thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to be part of this conversation and, kind of motivate everyone out there that might be looking into new solutions to implement in their organizations.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, and everyone, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and you especially, Christian, thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you, Justin.
Take care.
You too. Bye.
Let's see.